And you might start off with an idea, but if you do your research properly and listen to your target audience, you may well find that that original idea is not where you need to go. But if you're listening, that you can then, as you said before, I guess, pivot and adjust to where you identify the core need in the market is. Is that a fair comment?
Exactly. So I really like this data-driven approach, like validating your hypothesis before you even build something, right?
Welcome to Insights into Success, where with your host Paul Dodds, we hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. All right, so welcome anyway to Insights into Success. Our special guest today is Boris Manhart, who comes all the way from Switzerland and has very graciously agreed to join us today. His area of specialty relates to startups. So really interested to talk to you today, Boris. And I want to kick it off just by finding out a bit more about you, because from what I understand, you've had a bit of a history with startups yourself. And I wonder if you could just share a little bit of your journey with us.
Paul, thank you so much for having me. I started my entrepreneurial career 25 years ago already, so in the late 90s, and sold my first startup, which was kind of a party picture guide, so very early social media, if you want so, in 2000, I guess, to a big corporate. And then basically for the next 10 years, I was advising companies such as Unilever, Nestle, Microsoft, and so forth on digital advertising, right? So I had an agency. Right. After that time, I decided to go back into startups. I co-founded a fintech company in Switzerland, which became a unicorn then in 2019. And after that, I jumped into something totally different, probably more meaningful. We've built a shopping app for conscious consumption, right? So for sustainability, basically, which was pretty early back then, right? It was like, I guess, 2014. But it became a huge success in the German-speaking areas of Europe. Then we launched it as well in UK and the USA later. So we had around, I guess, 5-6 million active users with that app, and it's still there. Actually, it's called Kojak. And during the pandemic, I basically decided to, do something totally different, which is, again, startups, but from the other side, basically. So since then, I'm advising startups. I'm working with different startups, and mostly on product market fit, right? Which is, for me, the crucial stage of a startup, basically.
And so for you, how has it been being on the other side? Do you find it easier, frustrating? What sort of emotions come up being on the other side of the whole experience?
Well, it's much easier. It's much easier. So once you're into operations and you're struggling, you have, I don't know, your team complaining about things, right? So it's totally different. So you don't know what to focus on, and you don't see, like what's important, what matters now at this very moment. From the outside, you always see it, right? You always tell the partners, okay, focus on this, focus on fundraising, focus on product market fit, focus on scaling. So it's much, much easier. And obviously it's less hours work. So I have much more time for my family, totally different work-life balance. So I enjoy it, but I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't go back into startups or into founding someone again. So probably in future, but currently it's perfect like that.
Right. It's a nice balance for you.
Exactly. exactly.
So for you then, because you've been involved in a number of startups, are you a bit of an ideas guy? I mean, where do you fit in the whole scheme of things?
Not really. I would say I'm more, especially now, into building the right frameworks to succeed.
Yeah.
Because what matters most is finding the right markets, in my view, not the idea, right? The idea is something that you have to build for a certain group of customers, right? So you need customers, basically. It's always, I really love to work with founders with an idea before they have built a product, right? And what happens usually is they have a product vision, they have an idea, but it's changing, right? So, I mean, we have the term pivot, right? So it's changing and it's totally normal. So usually when I assess, especially when we at Growth Unlimited, which is my company, when we invest as well into a startup, we basically assess the capability of the founders, right?
Right.
They need to be able to succeed, and they need to be able as well to pivot. And that's a very important thing. So receiving feedback from like the outside, from your customers and so forth, and building something based on this feedback, that's what we try to implement and teach those founders and entrepreneurs.
I think in one of your articles, though, you did talk about you've got to be careful in terms of what feedback you listen to and what feedback that you just park to the side, that if you're not careful, you could end up being a victim of all the different people, all different businesses you're working with, and could take you down a track which is really taking you away from the core of what you're trying to achieve. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I would say there's different feedbacks, right? So one is just from all people, including advisors like me, your investors, and everybody knows better all the time, right? And this is really hard to basically filter out what's meaningful and what's not. But what I've been referring to was more like the feedback of the users, of your customers, basically. And I'm not saying that you should build a product vision or innovate based on the feedback of your users, but you should shape it based on the feedback, right? Because someone needs to use it. So it needs to be beneficial to them, right? It needs to have a great UX. They need to understand it. And this is all about, basically bringing value to your customers, basically, right? Yeah. And I think here, if you manage to get real feedback, listen to your customers, then it's always valuable. But if someone, like outside of your target group, an investor just knows it better, it's probably just, like rubbish, right? So don't need to listen to that, right? Sometimes it's good as well.
And so in your role these days, are you also at times an investor? Do you invest in some of these projects that you're involved with, or are you just in a consultancy role?
Exactly, we invest as well. So in very selected startups, they need to meet certain criteria. One is, for example, they need to be able to move fast, right? Because in all the startups we invest in, we want to bring them in 6 months to product market fit. That means they need to be able to iterate fast. So it's usually tech startups. It's not deep tech usually. It's more like, I would say, innovation on serving underserved needs, right? So basically, like one thing we're currently working on with the founder is a fintech for females. It's about female finances, right? Because women, but we find out as well with market research, women don't like the traditional banks, right? So it's much better if you basically build everything around finance to targeted to this target group, basically. So that's more the things we actually like. So see something that is probably, let's say, from a technical perspective already built, but see it from a different perspective for a different target group, basically.
Right. And so I guess like reading some of your literature and that, I kind of walk away with the impression that the idea isn't so important, that you really take a analytical approach to the whole process. And you might start off with an idea, but if you do your research properly and listen to your target audience, you may well find that that original idea is not where you need to go. But if you're listening, that you can then, as you said before, I guess, pivot and adjust to where you identify the core need in the market is. Is that a fair comment?
Exactly. So I really like this data-driven approach, like validating your hypothesis before you even build something, right? Yeah. Because your starting point, your idea, is a hypothesis, nothing else. And probably you have a very strong product vision, and you need to shape it. Like you need to shape it to build a product that people actually use and love. And I always say, like to do that, you need to love your users as well, right? Yeah. So what I tell my founders or the people I'm working with, love your users and not your product.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So for you, what are you looking for in the individuals? What are the sort of characteristics you're looking for that indicates to you that these people are likely to have what it takes to succeed with a startup?
Exactly. What I usually looked at, I work with founders with life experience already. So what really matters, I mean, we already had this, really matters is that they can basically receive feedback and learn and grow, right? So it's not about the skills of building a startup, because that's something me or my partners can actually bring into that whole journey, but it's about their expertise and their ability to learn and to grow, right? And this in a fast pace. So what I really like working with is, for example, people coming from business schools, right? They usually already have a career, basically. Like it can take EMBA students. I'm working with the IMD in Lausanne, which is a pretty famous business school. I really like to working with them because they learn to receive feedback, right? So they know how to work. They know how to work in a fast-paced environment. But they probably don't have the skills how to build a startup. But that's not necessary, right? Because that's our expertise, basically.
Right. So for you, like if you look at the media often, projects startups as being very much the territory of the very young, people maybe in their early 20s. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, how much does age play a factor, or is it really quite irrelevant and it's more just about experience, and different ages people can have quite varying experience? What's your take on the whole perception of startups and being a young person's game?
Well, research actually shows that the most successful founders are around 45.
Right.
So it's just a perception, basically, that it's typical young founders. I think it's, like a bit like wine. You get better when you get older to a certain extent, right? So it's just, I mean, it's a lot of work. You need to invest all your time into a startup. So probably a certain, like age, you're not able to do this anymore because your family and so forth, right?
Yeah.
But what I realized is that you're able to do much more in less time. So basically, probably a young founder works 18 hours a day, and you're able to do the same thing in 9 hours, right? So that's possible. So experience, if you're able to grow. That's what I mean by receiving feedback. If you're able to grow, if you're able to get better, experience actually helps.
Right. So for you, like you've been obviously very successful with your startups. What has been the key to your success with them? Why have you done as well as you have, as compared to some people might might undertake a number of startups and none of them actually work?
It's probably, I would say, more passion than really the data-driven framework I'm now implementing into startups. It was more passion. So I was really passionate about startups. I was passionate about, like the topics or the ideas or the visions we were building. So I was working hard, right?
Yeah.
But it would have been so much easier if I knew those kind of things, those frameworks at this time. But when I started, there was no information available. Like, we didn't even call it startup. So it was the earliest time basically, and we had to figure out everything on our own. It was trial and error, and like this, obviously losing a lot of time. It can be very frustrating if something just doesn't work. You just don't know why. And I think today we have all those frameworks. We have lots of research. We have lots of tools to measure, like how your customers behaving. They're like if they're happy with the tool, if they like your tool, and so forth. So this is a totally different setup these days, right?
Right. I would imagine that back when you started out, getting investor funds would have been probably a lot harder than it is now. Was that the case?
I don't think it was harder. It was different. We didn't have we didn't have a lot of VC funds in Europe, Switzerland. I mean, this changed totally. But there wasn't so many startups either, right? So probably the market was somehow similar, and we actually always started with lots of investment from angel investors. They obviously didn't call them angel investors back then. It was just rich people, basically.
So when you were starting out, how did you manage to network with rich people that were able to support you with your projects?
It's what you say, it's networking. So it's being on events, is talking to them, is just building a network from scratch basically. So which is a lot of work, and I'm happy that I have it now. This is great. So when you have to start from scratch, it's it's a lot of work, right?
Yeah. So when you started out, was it always the plan? Were you always, from early on thought, right, I want to do my own thing, and I'm going to get some investor funds and do a startup? Was that the plan, or did you kind of just fall into it by virtue of a series of events?
When you look back, it always looks like a plan, but to be honest, I just started, especially now my current business, I just wanted to have a break basically, and so I had the chance to work with a couple of startups, and I just realized that this is my passion, right? So I really love to work with founders. I love to work with startups, with their teams, with scale-ups as well, like bigger companies. It's just they need to have something in common. They need to move fast, right? So I want to see an impact basically, but that's my passion. So I probably, found the spot for me after, being in all those different kinds of areas, fintech, retail tech, and so forth. I would say now I can enjoy all different, areas. I work with fintech founders. I work with health tech founders. I work with an app that is focusing on new work. So all those different areas which are interesting to me, right? I could never really focus on just one single thing, and I can do everything, and that's just great. I learned a lot myself as well from the founders. Actually.
Yeah, I can imagine. So looking back now on your time, what's been your core sort of skills, the part of the startup that you really gravitate to? Like some people are very much maybe on the might be the implementation side, and other people are very much big picture, the whole concept, and that. Where has been your kind of area of greatest interest and skill?
You mean my area or the area of?
Yeah, your area. So when you've been doing your startups, which is, because imagine with your startups, you would have had a team around you. So what was the part of the whole process that you enjoyed and you felt that you excelled at the most?
I was usually founder / CEO, and CEO. We all know that is not a defined like role, so you can shape it basically. But I was always I would say the leader or part of the leadership team of the startup. Yeah. So basically the one on the front, means outside to media, to customers, but as well inside to the team. And obviously, like I was close to the product because that's part of the CEO's work as well. But as soon as you scale a product or startup, you have your product team. You need a product team basically, but you need to be close to them as well. I was always very close to marketing because I think as well you need to understand it, right? Sales as well. But as a CEO, I would say you're a bit into everything. You probably shape the product vision, right? So you have the let's say the helicopter view on where to go.
Yeah.
But I would say the most important thing is really to align your team on those goals, right? So that everybody actually goes in the right direction.
And with all your different startups, did you always incorporate as part of the model that the team were shareholders as well?
Yes, that's true. I always try to have at least a key team as shareholders as well. So I think it's very important to have ownership in your company in the topic. So that's just something that motivates people, especially when you start early, right? Because you're not able to pay a lot, and you want to have great talent. So you usually give them parts of your company.
Yeah. And at what point in the whole process does it typically become boring for you and you think, okay, now it's time to sell? At what point do you achieve that?
Yeah, this usually happens when it gets slower. I really like the high-paced environments. So when you see you're changing something and something happens, right? So it's really input output on a daily basis, basically. And when this becomes, I would say, slower when politics are involved, then it's not my piece of cake anymore.
Yeah.
So I never work with corporates because they're just moving too slow.
Right. So that's the time to exit.
Exactly.
Because I mean, you look at different success stories out there, and you hear of ones where they sold well before, I guess, maturity of the business, and then you get the odd one where they've hung in there and the business matured. An example, I guess, would be like Facebook, for instance. And I think, do you think for a lot of startup people, the fun goes out of it, so they're quite happy to kind of exit and not hang around like a Mark Zuckerberg and see it through to that level?
Well, the truth is, when you exit to a bigger company, you usually need to stay for a couple of years, right? So you're not just exiting and then just leave, right? So that's not how it works. So I guess it's really depends on the team. It depends on the goals the team have or the founders have. It depends on the topic, right? Some startups just solve, let's say, a tiny problem or serve a niche and probably are perfect as an add-on for a bigger product. And to just that's their goal, right? That's totally okay. And others grow and become a corporate as well for themselves. But what we have to say is that probably 95 or even more % of startups actually fail, right? So you want to belong at least to those who sail or to go public. right?
Yeah. And was failure ever an option for you, or were you just so determined that you were going to succeed? It just wasn't viable. You just weren't going to let that happen.
Well, it was totally, like depending on as well on the team, on the setup. So at the last gig, I remember like selling was not an option at all. So it's really depending on the topic as well for me. It's not something that I just like say for me as a person I don't want to sell or whatever. It's really depending, and obviously I think it's as well. I guess you can buy everything, you just need to pay the price. So we probably just didn't have the option or the opportunity to sell it at the price that we actually wanted to, right?
So do you think that in order to succeed, it would be useful to have a degree of naivety, a balance, not too much, but a little bit? And what I mean by that is, like, if you knew, and if a lot of entrepreneurs knew in advance what it was going to take for them to succeed, do you think they would still do it? And is it sometimes because you don't quite know what you're getting yourself into, it can help you to do it? Otherwise, if you knew, you would never have started in the first place. What's your thoughts on that?
Paul, I think that's a very, very good question, because it's a question I ask myself a lot of time, right? So do I want to do this again? Because as let's say a first-time founder, you just don't know what's going to happen. Right? You just start and you gain your experience on the journey, basically. But when you've already been there, you might think twice if you want to start again. But what I see is that actually lots of founders do it again. So it has its beauty, right? You have a lot of freedom. You can live your dream because you can literally decide on what you want to work on, right?
Yeah.
And you can seek for topics that you're really passionate about. And then it becomes your hobby, kind of, you just, like, you love to work on it, and you love to work on it on the weekends, on night shifts, doesn't matter. So that's the nice thing. But well, it's hard to say. I guess probably this naivety is an advantage of first-time founders, I would say.
Yeah, no, it seems to be something that comes up from time to time, where people comment about how if they only knew what was involved, they probably never would have done it, but they don't regret the fact that they did.
Yeah.
So there's kind of that irony there. Yeah. So I think obviously you don't want too much naivety that you just take on something that's so just out of your league that you've got no hope. But by the same token, not quite knowing exactly what all's going to be entailed might not be such a bad thing sometimes too. So tell me, like, do you sort of, when you meet people, get a gut sense of, oh, this person's got what it takes? Can that be quite self-evident, or is that something that takes a bit of time for you to get to know the people before you can feel confidence as to whether they've really got what it takes to push through and succeed with their startup?
Oof, that's a very hard one, because I think, I'm not a fortune teller, right? So
no.
I cannot say what's happening in future. And what I can, say is that what I usually feel is that some are, I would say, have the capabilities or more capabilities to succeed than others. But you cannot predict if it's really if it's going to be a success or not. So this is a hard one. What I can say is you can lower the risk. So by understanding those people, by do your homework, basically assess them, talk to them a lot, spend some time with them. So usually before I invest into a startup, I really spend a lot of time with the founders.
Yeah,
which is something that is probably where I learn most about them. And I assess the idea as well. I said the idea is not that important, but for me, it's a very important thing to understand if the idea itself makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So that's something. Obviously, I talk to other people that know them, so it's kind of a mix. You just want to. It's the same thing for a startup. You want to have as much information as possible before you actually start, right?
Yeah. And for you, do you just work with people in Switzerland, or do you work with people from other parts of the world as well?
Yeah, I mean, you're based in New Zealand, so I'm actually working with one founder in New Zealand as well.
Really?
Yeah. Dan Plus, great guy. He's a triathlete, a sports scientist. Basically, has a company called Endure IQ, helping triathletes to succeed, like to get better, and very successful trainer and coach. So, but we had the same issues as we have, right? So it's always really early or very late when we talk, right? So yeah, I'm working with startups all over the world, basically.
And so how do you manage to make contact and those arrangements develop, like taking this one you talk about in New Zealand? I mean, how did that come about?
Well, this would be probably too long story, but usually I get contacted by many founders from all over the world, as well, like you reading my articles, for example.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have a bit of broader network here in Europe, so it's, I would say, probably 70% of my customers come from the German speaking areas in Europe.
Yeah. And for you, working with businesses around the world, do you see much variation in the nature of the entrepreneurs? Are they all pretty much the same type of people?
I would say it's they're pretty much the same. Like it's you need to have this I would say founder gene. This is probably pretty international. So everybody's is reading the same blogs. Everybody's reading the same books. So they have similar backgrounds. Especially here in Switzerland, we have especially here in Zurich, I would say we have a pretty international setup. So it's like it's globalized, right? So I don't see a difference anymore.
So looking back, what do you think was some of the key mistakes that you made with your startups? Was there anything that really jumps out to you?
How much time do we have?
It's up to you.
Yeah, I would say like the biggest mistake I did is not receiving myself, not being able to receive feedback and to grow.
Right.
I was sometimes too focused on just execution, on working on an idea and to build something, and stop basically reading, stop taking that time to learn and grow. I guess that's the biggest mistake a founder actually can do, because what I believe is this is one of the most crucial success factors for a founder. It's their ability to grow, to learn, to catch up new things, because markets are changing so dramatically these days, right? Now with AI, for example. So everything will change again. So you need to be able to quickly change, to react, to be even ahead, so you can act and not react, basically. Another thing that like I see now as well, working with other founders, that happened to me as well, is basically not being focused on things that matter, right? When talking about product market fit, if you pre-product market fit, you should focus on reaching product market fit and only on that, not on fundraising, not on building the team, not on building a perfect product. A product just needs to be good enough to reach product market fit, right? So focus is a very important thing. Then one thing as well, when you grow a little bit beyond, or when you're beyond a product market fit and you grow a team, you need to align the team. That means you need to have the right frameworks, for example, as OKRs, to be able to do that, to be the leader that you want to be. So I guess that's super important. I think, like as well, what happened to me as well was like sometimes I was too satisfied.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, now we reached a certain milestone, and then you just you can't lean back. One milestone, and then comes the next, basically, right? It's super crucial that you actually reach those milestones as well, because this is an agreement between you and your investors, right? So that's super important. Yeah, I guess that's probably some of the most important things. One thing that probably as well I learned the hard way is hiring the right people. And I guess that's would say as a CEO, and this is something I didn't mention before, probably your most important task, right? To find the right people for a team, to hire a great key team, especially. So what I realized, I always had this approach that was looking on the track records. I was talking to references. I was always looking at their past.
Yeah.
And sometimes you see a CV and you just think, okay, this person actually fits perfectly into that role, and that might be the truth, right? Because you have the skills. But I realized it's better to hire for will than for skill, right? So you need to have the right people that are able to grow in a certain role, because the problem with startups is that you don't know how the role actually looks like in a couple of months or years from now, right? So it will change a lot. So if you have these great people always worked on the same thing, and you just think, okay, they can solve it, right? They're a perfect fit. But that's just for the moment.
Yeah.
They probably solve you something for the next 3 months, and then they need to change. They need to be able to grow into a totally different role, probably. So that's important to hire for well. I guess that's the probably the most important things. There's tons more. I'm actually working on a list of my 50 biggest failures. It's currently at I don't know, at failure 29 or something. So there's a lot of learnings coming from failures.
So one of my, I guess one of the things that I think about where there's a failing when it comes to recruitment at the moment is, and you've touched on it, is this very issue that with recruitment, particularly recruitment agents, focus on your CV and your history and what you've done. And as you touched on, there's limitations there. If someone's done something for 5 years, a recruitment agent typically put them forward for the job that requires that on the premise that obviously they've got loads of experience, so perfect for the role. However, in my opinion, the way things are these days, we're evolving so much that the people that you want, the people that succeed, are those that are adaptable, those that are willing to learn and will evolve as time goes on. And I guess, in a startup, as you're talking about, things can be so dynamic. So you want someone, do you not, that has the ability to learn and to evolve. So they may not have that 5 years experience doing X, Y, Z, but they have the ability to learn how to do X, Y, Z, but also then shift on to something else 3 months later when you realize that that's where you really need to go. But to me, that's a real failing that we have with recruitment, is not picking those people that have that ability to evolve.
I think there are different kinds of recruiting agents. There are some that really anticipate those, like a little bit the future and know the startup ecosystem. And there are others that just have a look on the CVs. But I guess usually they work the way you want them to work. And they're just used to work based on the track record, based on CV, because that's what usually people and companies want. So I always like as well from not only from when I work with hiring agents in a startup or in the role of a CEO, but as well from the other side. I like to work with those who are actually interested in people, to actually talk, to build a relationship, and probably are not just keen on the quick sale, basically, or bringing someone quickly into a team, but really kind of like spend time with them, or even kind of like stay in contact over years sometimes with people. So I think those are the good ones, basically.
And with your startups, are you seeing a permanent shift towards teams being remote from one another, or are you seeing people coming back to being in that office environment? What's your view on what's happening there?
Yeah, so I have a very clear opinion in that. I think teams should be able to work remotely. So the culture must be strong enough to build those remote teams.
Yeah.
Right. So that's obviously a challenge, but it's doable. I must say I like still working with the founders on site from time to time, because especially when it comes to like discussing or doing some workshops or whatever, I just think like being together for a couple of hours, spending some time together, has its its advantages, right? So it's just you get further in less time. What happens as well when you do workshops online, then it's you probably have to split them into, let's say, 1 hour workshops, because people just get tired much faster.
Yeah.
So I guess sometimes the fun is a bit lacking, right? But I think these days you should be able to recruit worldwide as well, to build remote teams, to have strong values as a company, strong culture that basically and able to transport this culture all over the world, right? So to people that just works somewhere, right? Because you just want to have the best team possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you want them, as part of that, is for them to be really happy. And if their environment is somewhere else, but they can do a great job for you, then what difference should that make?
Absolutely.
So you touched on before about the importance of moving quickly. And I know, like reading some of your articles, and one in particular, you talk about how be careful not to seek investor funding too quickly. However, is there not a real pressure if there's a real emphasis on wanting to develop your concept quickly and get to market? Doesn't that put a lot of pressure on you to get an investor in earlier so that you can recruit the people so that you can actually achieve those objectives a lot quicker? Like, you might be able to do it on your own or in a small group, self-funded, but it might take 12 months to do it. Whereas if you got money in, you might have the same project knocked out in 3 months. How do you reconcile that and come to the best or the optimum solution?
Look, Paul, I don't think that there's a perfect solution to that, right?
Yeah.
So, but the reality is that usually you're not able to fundraise at the very early stage, because investors want to see they want to like lower their risks, right? They want to see some traction, or probably you're a serial entrepreneur, and then they see your track record, and then probably they invest from day one, just in you, right?
You're right.
But usually when you start, you need to prove something before you like get investments, and it's good for you as well, because you don't want to sell a huge stake of your company because you're actually fundraising too early. Or you don't want to invest all your resources into fundraising. You want to invest them into your achieving product market fit, basically into your product, into building a right team, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's that's just, like, should be your focus at this stage. And I think, like lots of startups, they start, or they focus on fundraising very, very early, but they fail. So they spend a lot of time in fundraising until they realize, no, I need to show traction first, or let's say a certain traction. I'm not talking about, when I'm saying traction at this stage, I'm not talking about having thousands of customers, but just having data that basically proves you're on the right track.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So do you think, is the appetite for startups changing at all? Are you seeing trends at the moment in terms of what investors are looking for with their startups?
Well, I would say we see a lot of AI startups coming up, and I think there's a lot of risk involved as well into that, because it's a big hype, and I've seen those hypes in the past. The first one was the .com hype, and the latest the crypto blockchain hype, right? So it's like I always say, like, investors are a big like lemmings. They always move in the same direction, invest in the same things, and then what happens? Some startups fail, and then they basically get back to I would say, normal assessment of ideas, of the value that a startup is actually providing. So obviously, I mean, you see all those, I would say, very tech-focused AI companies popping up currently,
right,
that are not solving a real problem basically out there, right? So a lot of generative idea focusing on images and whatever. I'm actually just writing an article on that. So you can read it in a couple of days. But yeah, so there's always obviously those buzzwords, and people are investing into those buzzwords.
Yeah. So just to sort of close things off, what's a couple of suggestions you'd make for people that are contemplating doing a startup? What's some, I guess, some initial advice that you'd give people, of things for them to think about?
Yeah. So I guess the most important thing is, when you start, is to validate your hypothesis and go deep, right? Do it the right way. You can read it up. There is lots of posts, lots of literature on that. So you need to invent something new. So do your homework, go deep, interview people, listen to them, right? That's super important, because founders are so trained to sell their idea to investors, to the outside in general. They need to learn to listen again, right? So that's the crucial step. And start with the problem. Start understanding the problems, the needs your customer have, and then build the solution. So that means usually they come with the solution and then try to figure out what kind of needs they can cover, right? But that's not the right way. So do it in a proper way. Be open for feedback, and be open to change your product vision at this stage, and really validate, get some traction. And as soon as you have your data, as soon as you know your customers, as soon as you know how to scale, then start scaling quickly, right? So build the right team, assess the competencies you need to achieve your goals, build the team accordingly, and then just basically align them and rush, right?
Yeah, just with this, you wrote a good article, which it's called "How to Validate Your Idea Without Writing a Single Line of Code." Really good article. That's articles on Medium, is it? Or Entrepreneur's Handbook, which is also part of Medium. Exactly. And the thing I liked about that was what it's saying is, like, in terms of asking questions, that you've got to make sure that you don't bias the outcome by, you've already come up with a solution to a problem you've identified, and you can't help but allow that to permeate through your questions. And part of what you're saying is you've got to detach yourself from that and ask some genuine questions that don't give any indication of what it might be that you're up to, so that you get some quality information. Because you can definitely see that it would be very easy as a person with an idea. You want an outcome, so you inadvertently allow yourself to taint your questions, to frame everything to get the answers that you want, which may not be the reality of the market.
Absolutely. And I guess that's the crucial thing, basically, because what I see is when I talk to founders, and even when I look at my past experience, I would say that hardly any hypotheses are being validated. They do it in a way that they will get positive feedback. They basically ask the audience out there, would you like to have this? And everybody says, okay, it's a nice person, like I don't want to bother them. So yes, would be a cool idea. And it's just, this is no validation. So you need to understand basically the needs, as I mentioned before, the needs and the problems of your customers first, and then start building. And that's just happens with listening, right? So you ask them, you want to learn about their, like daily habits, about, how they're dealing with a certain problem, a certain space, and learn. And this is something I could suggest doing at every step. So first, when you focus on the problem, you have your hypothesis, what kind of problems they have, and you want to hear those problems, right? So you just ask very general question, and if they start talking about such a problem by themselves, then you have stronger evidence that this is actual problem, right? Yeah. Obviously, we're not talking about market research here. This is always a very limited sample. You're able to run interviews with, let's say, 10, 20. Well, I saw some founders doing interviews with 80 people, but that's then really a lot of work involved, right? But you're not able to talk to thousands of people, right? So it's always a very limited sample. But you will get a feel for your customer. And this is how startup validation works. You get a feel, right? It's not about validating in the sense of science, where you say, okay, that's proven. Yeah. But you will understand your customer, you go in the right direction. And I guess what's crucial, you should get to the point where you validate your value proposition. And I would say that's the most crucial step in a startup, because your value proposition will shape your team, will shape your product, will shape your future strategy and everything, right? It's all based on that. Because this is about, like how you differentiate, what kind of value, what kind of benefits you will deliver. It's not about the features, right? Feature is just basically, like a feature is delivering value, right? Yeah. So you need to think in benefits, basically, then when building a product. So that's what I mean with testing an idea before you start, building your product, is like really getting to the point where you validate your value proposition and then start building your product, because that will shape it.
Now, one thing with the questions that I wanted just to get a little bit of feedback from you is, one of the things you say is, don't ask them who you're interviewing, don't ask them for their ideas. Can you just tell me a little bit about why that's the case?
Yeah, that's a very bad idea, because everybody has tons of ideas, right? And you can get into this trap where people don't give feedback anymore on, like their needs and so forth, but they just start advising you. It will like it's basically becomes a brainstorming with your potential customers, and that's a very bad idea, because you don't want that, right? You're building a product, and you're building the ideas based on the needs of the customers. So you don't want to discuss the solution already with your customer at this stage, right?
Yeah.
And once you get into validating your solutions, you want to show your ideas and you want to get their feedback. You can do this with a presentation or whatever, right? Or with an early prototype. but you want to get their feedback on these ideas, because that's what you build upon your data, the data you have, and you have much more data than the people or the person you're talking to, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Boris. It's been fantastic talking to you. Now, question for you to wrap this up completely is, do you recommend people reading books as part of the process? Are you big on reading?
Yeah. I even have my own personal OKRs, and one OKR is always reading books. I have to push myself from time to time a little bit as well, right?
Yeah.
But I just take time to read. I guess that's very important, because you will get inspired by reading, and obviously you'll learn and grow a lot.
And do you have any books you'd like to share with us, recommend that our listeners should read?
Yeah, one I can really recommend is this on strategy. There's a book called Scaling Up.
Ah, right, yes.
Right, from Bernard, and it's very applicable, so you can really use it right away. So I'm using this a lot for basically when I work with scale-ups, and I think it's a great book. Then one book I've been reading is The 4,000 Weeks. I don't know if you know that. It's basically your life, right? Your life.
Right.
Lasts around 4,000 weeks, right? And it's basically about making the best out of it. Well, it's called Time and How to Use It. That's the second title. So I really can recommend that. It's not a business book, obviously. And then what else? One thing I really enjoyed reading was a book on venture capital, because that has always been the other side for me, right? I wasn't part of that. I never knew why they decide the way they decide. And what I can recommend to every founder is Secrets of Sandhill Road, which is a book on venture capital, and it really helps to understand the other side, right? And I think that is something that you need as a founder, because you always have, let's say, fewer information than the VCs have, right? So when you fundraise, you do this every year, like for a couple of months, and you focus only on your topic, basically. And they do it on a daily basis, and see so many things, and have so many things to can compare different founders, different startups, so forth. So they have a lot more information than you have. And I think this helps to close this gap a little bit. Yeah, that would be probably the books I can recommend right now.
That sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Boris, for your time. You've been fantastic.